seconds to go. One last gasp for Edmonton. Bouchard's pass didn't click with Draisaitl. 12 seconds to go. Florida trying to end it up against the wall, which would be fitting. 3 seconds to go. The Florida Panthers have won the Stanley Cup.
"343 days ago, the Panthers won their Stanley Cup, beating the Oilers 2-1 in Game 7 after almost blowing a 3-0 series lead. This time, Florida will go for the repeat, an attempt to break the hearts of Edmonton once again. Time now to welcome in CBS Sports NHL analyst and writer Pete Blackburn. And Pete, this is the first back-to-back Stanley Cup rematch since '09 with the Penguins, Red Wings, and I don't expect the Panthers to be a Popeye's biscuit away from choking on a 3-0 series lead in this one. But what are you excited most about with this latest installment of this matchup?
That both teams are better. Like, it's crazy to be excited about a rematch and not feel any sort of fatigue just because both these teams are so much better in my mind than they were last year. Edmonton has been an unbelievable defensive team throughout this run. I think their depth has shown through during this run. Their goaltending has been great ever since Stu Skinner restabilized. And then you look on the other side, the Florida Panthers are the reigning Stanley Cup champions that added not only Seth Jones, who has been a #1 defenseman in this league, they also added Brad Marchand, who's a leader, fits exactly into their mold, is a veteran presence, and is a playoff agitator and boogeyman. Like, they're just both stronger on both sides of the sword here. And so to me, like, you're adding in Connor McDavid, you're adding in Leon Draisaitl, you're adding in Sasha Barkov. Like, those are headliners, but we're just talking about teams right now that are at the peaks of their power, and we've seen it in both conferences throughout these playoffs so far. By far the two most dominant teams.
Yeah, so that means we should get an electric series, right? Hopefully 7 games. Now, Canada hasn't been able to celebrate a Stanley Cup since 1993 when I was still in diapers. So there's pressure, Pete, for the Oilers from that standpoint. But let me pose a different question to you. Is there more pressure on them to end the drought or exact revenge on the Panthers?
Yeah, I don't think the Oilers are so much considering the drought right now. Like, they are trying to capitalize on the Connor McDavid window. And I think the pressure is definitely on Edmonton here. Not only because the McDavid window is only so finite, but also because it's kind of uncertain right now. He has yet to sign an extension. He's not going to be able to sign an extension until this summer. Winning a Stanley Cup would go a long ways in keeping him in Edmonton for the long haul, making him an Oiler for life. So, you know, not that I think that anything can particularly happen in the Stanley Cup final that would turn Connor McDavid away from wanting to be an Edmonton Oiler for life, but like, it would just be a first step in not only securing that legacy, but also keeping him there for the long haul and being the first Canadian team to end the drought, when I think a lot of those Canadian teams want to be the one to do it, to bring the cup back to Canada.
Right, now you talk about legacy, right, with Connor McDavid. He is already an all-time great with 5 scoring titles, 3 MVPs, and he had his moment in the Four Nations face-off. Perhaps it's the year of McDavid. So what would a Stanley Cup do for his legacy, Pete?
I think it would shut up a lot of the haters, you know, regardless of how talented Connor McDavid is. And he might be the most talented and skilled player that we've ever seen play the sport of hockey. You know, you kind of shift the discussion from great to GOAT when there's championships involved, and he needs at least one. And we kind of saw it with Alexander Ovechkin and his wait for his Stanley Cup. Well, he's the greatest goal scorer of all time, but the haters came out in full force to say, well, he can't win when it matters most. He doesn't have a Stanley Cup. You know, you can't really truly be considered one of the Mount Rushmore greats without that. And, you know, to a certain extent, I agree, but we're also talking about the most team-forward and team-centric sport. This is not, you know, the NBA or MLB, where it's so individually stat-based, where one guy can hold up a team. You know, even if you're the best skater on the ice, you're playing maximum a third of the game. So it will mean a lot even though it probably shouldn't mean as much as it probably will in reality.
Now, I'm with you on that. Like, regardless of what happens, Connor McDavid will be remembered as one of the best, if not the best, player in the NHL when you look at all the history, right? But getting that Stanley Cup would definitely put him into a different conversation. Now, when we think about, you said, look, this is a team sport, right, where it's very team-oriented, where you only play a third of the game. What's the biggest reason why Edmonton will win the Stanley Cup?
Well, funny enough, the biggest reason is Connor McDavid. Like, I know it's an individual and team sport discussion here, but the one thing that the Panthers can't match, even if they can match every other element, they can't match having the best player in the game, and that's Connor McDavid. He's got the most points in the playoffs so far, and we kind of saw what the Edmonton Oilers were and were not when he was producing and not producing in last year's Stanley Cup Final. He turned things on after a couple games. They're just so much more dangerous when they have that game breaker at the height of his abilities. And Connor McDavid can absolutely shift the scale in this series, especially when the margins are so razor thin. So he's going to need to get the better of Sasha Barkov, this Selke winner. It's not an easy task going up against the best defensive forward in the game, but Connor McDavid is the best overall player in the game for a reason, and he needs to show that here in the Stanley Cup.
Yeah, you know he's licking his chops to get back against the Panthers after they took away what was so close for him getting that first Stanley Cup. Now, the last time, Pete, a team went back-to-back was in 2021 when the Lightning did it. So what would back-to-back Lord Stanleys mean for the Panthers?
I think we'd be starting the dynasty discussion, and I think it's well worth it because it's hard enough to get to 3 Stanley Cup Finals in a row, but to win 2 out of the 3, you're absolutely in that dynasty discussion in the modern day NHL. And I think a big reason why the Panthers will have won that second straight is depth. They've improved their depth this year. I already mentioned Brad Marchand, but that Luostarinen, Lundell, Marchand line is arguably the best of the playoffs so far. Not only just the best of the Panthers, one of the more dominant lines in the entire playoffs. And when I look at a Stanley Cup contender really taking that next step into being a powerhouse, the third line is arguably the most important because that's where you can kind of shift the matchup game. And not only can that third line be a dominant defensive line, they can also produce offensively and win their minutes. And that's going to be huge, especially going up against an Oilers team that's improved their depth. But I just don't know if their bottom 6 is going to hold as much weight and pack as much of a punch as the Panthers can in this series.
So with all that being said, Pete, do you think that is like the biggest reason why the Panthers will win, or that's the X factor that's going to just give them that hump over the Edmonton Oilers?
Yeah, I do. Again, like the margins are so razor thin here, and this is going to be a great matchup. But where I would point to maybe the depth being shifted is that third line. I think that you can. The fact that you can name all 3 players on the Panthers' third line has proven how good they are and just kind of how much they have an edge maybe in that bottom 6 going up against the Oilers, who, like, to their credit, the Oilers are getting bottom 6 contributions as well. I just don't know if it's going to show up in the same way in this series as Florida's can.
Well, whatever happens, Pete, it should be a fantastic series, and we cannot wait to see how it all shakes out. Pete Blackburn, always appreciate talking puck with you, man.
Thank you.
And so here's a little look at the Panthers all-time in the Stanley Cup Final. So they're 1-2, but that 1 is the latest result, right, in 2024 when they beat the Oilers in 7 games. Now they face Edmonton once again, looking for the repeat.